Hey guys, this is your host Thomas Tyree here from All in the Hot Podcast. Today, this will be the Combat Series episode number 127 for you guys today. And to kick off the Combat Series this week, we're going to pivot over to the world of MMA inside the UFC world. And I'll be sharing my UFC 322 main event summary between JDM and Islam Makhachev. So it was Islam Makhachev, the challenger, who decimated and dominated the champion JDM, winning the fight by unanimous decision to become a two-division world champion and to become the new welterweight champion in the main event of UFC 322. So my fight summary on the fight that took place between Islam Makhachev and JDM. This was a one-sided affair between Islam Makhachev and JDM. And a lot of people, like myself, thought this could have been a really fun, entertaining fight. And I thought this would have showed flashes of what we saw the first time back in 2023 between Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski in their first fight. I was completely wrong. It was a 5-0 shutout in favor of Islam Makhachev. I mean, this was a one-sided problem. And new weight class for Islam Makhachev, no problem. Who is a top 3 pound-for-pound star. No matter how you have your UFC pound-for-pound rankings. He had his way with JDM, dismantled and dominated him in the wrestling and the grappling department. I mean, looking at how dominant Islam Makhachev was for the 25 minutes of a 5 championship round fight, Islam Makhachev logged in a 19 minutes of control time, manhandling JDM on the ground, basically breaking his will. If you guys saw by round 5, he had a sad look on his face. His corner was trying to bring him back into the fight, to at least fight hard for another 5 minutes and possibly land a lucky shot to land a knockout victory. But Islam Makhachev also outlanded JDM by, in total strikes, 123 punches to 32 total punches that was scored by JDM. This was a complete beatdown, and there's no other way to judge the fight other than Islam Makhachev by complete domination. You have to have the fight scored 5-0 in favor of Islam if you saw the main event of UFC 322. Honestly, for JDM, I thought he would have been better prepared defensively. I mean, his own Australian mate who got in the octagon with Islam Makhachev twice, Alexander Volkanovski, told JDM to be prepared to stuff the takedowns, to be alert defensively in terms of that wrestling and grappling department that Islam Makhachev is so dominant at. But I don't think he was really prepared. I don't know what the game plan was for the fight. I don't know how the training camp went, because Islam only landed 4 takedowns. And he was still so dominant in that fight against JDM. I thought he would have been better at this. You look at his fight that happened in the spring against Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad's a pretty good wrestler and grappler. Not on the level of Islam Makhachev, clearly. But he did a much better job stuffing the takedowns, being prepared for the grappling game in that fight compared to the game plan that we saw last night against Islam Makhachev. So, JDM is known for his striking. He had no chance of getting going offensively in the striking department. Could not land that lucky shot that his corner was banking on in the 5th and the final round of the fight. At least he could have got a couple of shots a couple power shots in against Islam Makhachev during the fight. That could have changed the trajectory of the fight offensively for you, and you could have figured out something. That Islam Makhachev just shut down everything for the whole entire duration of the fight. But Islam Makhachev now extends his winning streak to 16 straight victories in his UFC/MMA career. That's actually tying Anderson Silva for the longest win streak in UFC history with 16 straight UFC victories. So remarkable achievement by Islam Makhachev to achieve this after becoming 2-division world champion, joining an elite list of fighters and Hall of Famers that had became a 2-division world champion in their illustrious UFC careers. Now Islam Makhachev joins that list and now ties the great Anderson Silva for the most consecutive wins for a win streak in UFC history. There is something that I do want to address before I address what's next for these respective fighters, and that is in the grappling department for these big fights in the UFC, because I have to address the biggest elephant in the room. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, like I said, I have to address the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to grappling and wrestling and these big UFC fights that we see in the calendar year 2025. By any means, I'm not discriminating grappling and wrestling inside of an octagon inside the MMA world, because that is the beautiful art of mixed martial arts with the wrestling and the grappling. But the wrestling and the grappling has been watered down in the 2 biggest championship fights that the male divisions have seen in the calendar year 2025. Look at what we saw by the end of the summer between Khamzat Chimaev and DDP. That was a highly anticipated fight for the middleweight championship, and it was watered down and sandbagged by wrestling and grappling. Khamzat Chimaev had 21 out of 25 minutes of ground control in that fight against DDP in a highly contested championship fight. Then, last night in the main event of UFC 322, another highly anticipated fight with Islam Makhachev moving up the welterweight. 19 out of 25 minutes, Islam Makhachev smothered and dominated JDM in the grappling department, controlling the fight for having control time 19 out of 25 minutes of that championship fight. So, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but wrestling and grappling has watered down and sandbagged two of the biggest championship fights that the UFC has seen in the male department this year. And it's left the sour taste in fans' mouths because at least you could do that. But damn it, give us a show. Give us some entertainment with the striking as well. Because Khamzat Chimaev is a good striker. Islam Makhachev is a good striker. And we didn't get shit out of that in the two biggest championship fights that we see in 2025. Absolutely sandbagged and watered down. I'm not saying that you can't do that, because clearly it's an element to mixed martial arts, and that's an art of mixed martial arts, being in your bag as a grappler and a wrestler and a submission specialist. But damn it, in the big fights, can you do something else besides waste our time by watching you hug and clinch and just control time and just smothering your opponent down on the mat? Like, can we see some entertainment? And these are main event fights. These guys are headlining and main eventing these UFC fights. So, only complaint I have this year for 2025 and the males department, I just had to address the biggest elephant in the room, because I know a lot of people were expecting a show last night in the main event of UFC 322, and especially a show between Khamzat Chimaev and DDP in late summer for that middleweight championship. But moving on, what's next for Islam Makhachev? Now, there's a long list of opponents for Islam Makhachev to fight next, as he's now the new welterweight champion in the UFC. I don't think we need to see Islam Makhachev and JDM immediate rematch anytime soon. I mean, that was a dismantle and complete domination, 5-0 shutout by Islam Makhachev once again. But the welterweight division, in my opinion, is the most stacked division in the UFC today. So there's a lot of matchups for Islam Makhachev. We can see Islam Makhachev versus Michael Morales. He was pretty impressive in his first round knockout victory against Sean Brady on the undercard of the 322 card. He's undefeated in his MMA career. I think that's a really good must-see fight for the welterweight championship at some point in 2026. Islam Makhachev versus Kamaru Usman is still a very interesting fight that I would like to see. Kamaru Usman looked like he turned back the clock, defeating Buckley in impressive fashion during the summertime. And Kamaru Usman clearly wants to get a crack at the welterweight championship and has aspirations to fight Islam Makhachev. I would love to see that in 2026. There's two other interesting fights for Islam Makhachev as well. Carlos Pertiz was also successful on the UFC 322 undercard, knocking out Leon Edwards in the second round. And also, let's not forget about the forgotten guy in this division, Shavkat Rakhmonov. I would love to see Islam Makhachev versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's unfortunately missed the entire year 2025 due to an injury. But all of those championship fights are must-see fights for Islam Makhachev to defend his title next in 2026 in the most stacked division that the UFC has to offer today in the welterweight division. Hands down, they got the stars. The stars can deliver with knockout power, get the submission finishes. Like, there's so much star power at this welterweight division. The UFC needs to capitalize on this by having Islam Makhachev defend his welterweight championship against one of the names that I just mentioned in 2026. What's next for JDM? A loss here doesn't define who JDM is, in my opinion. I mean, if you guys really think about it, JDM, after he lost his first two MMA fights, won 18 straight MMA fights and became world champion. So I don't think he's a bad fighter. I think he's still one hell of a fighter. What defines you as a fighter is how you get back up from this loss. And he's a former world champion, so he's going to have plenty of options. He could have the rematch against Bilal Muhammad. I think that's a pretty interesting fight to see them two running back. Sean Brady versus JDM, a loser's bracket from the UFC 322 card. I think that's a really compelling fight between those two respective fighters. JDM versus Ian Gary. I think that's another compelling fight that would sell. and definitely would be a striking clinic. Or you could have JDM versus Carla Pertis if he does not get a UFC world title shot at the welterweight division next against Islam Makhachev. So there's a lot of options for JDM next, or who he should fight next. But that is my Islam Makhachev versus JDM fight summary from the main event of UFC 322.